Have you ever heard of the carnivore diet? What is it? Is it something that will just instantly cause you to get heart disease, cancer, and clog all of your arteries? Or is it something that will actually help boost your health, boost your function, and potentially boost your longevity? On today's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, we are sitting down to discuss this topic with none other than Dr. Shawn Baker, one of the biggest proponents of the carnivore diet. We're going to cue the intro song, and then we're going to dive right into this conversation with Dr. Shawn Baker. Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie.
And we're coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg in Schaumburg, Illinois. Now, at Muscle Activation Schaumburg, we believe your health is your most valuable asset. And the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise that's geared towards improving the function of your muscles. Now, today on the Exercise is Health podcast, we are talking about the carnivore diet. If you haven't heard of the carnivore diet, you are going to get an earful on today's episode, and it sounds awesome. We are sitting down with one of the biggest proponents of the carnivore diet, none other than Dr. Shawn Baker. Dr. Shawn Baker is an orthopedic surgeon, a world record-holding athlete, and the CEO of MeatRx, in addition to being the author of the book, The Carnivore Diet, as well as an international speaker and podcast host. Dr. Baker, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to our show.
Hey, it is my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, no, really, we're really excited about this as well. So tell us more about how you got into medicine to begin with, and then how that kind of transformed into what is now the carnivore diet and what you were doing with that.
Yeah, I guess my decision to go into medicine probably went back to, I think, sixth grade. I think I was an 11, 12-year-old kid. We had a science teacher that I thought was great. Thought she was very attractive science teacher, Mrs. Hayes. I remember we were just enamored by her. And anyway, but I, really fell in love with science at about sixth grade. And then as an athlete in high school, I gravitated toward biology. And then I started training as an athlete and, weightlifting, and got interested in how the human body works. By about the age of 16, I decided I was going to become a doctor. So I started studying for the medical college acceptance test, which you don't take until you're actually a junior in college. But I started studying when I was like 16 years of age. I remember I was working at a restaurant. I started out as a dishwasher, then I was a busboy, and then I was a room service waiter, and then eventually I was a doorman for a bar that I wasn't old enough to go into, but I was a doorman because I was a big guy.
That's awesome.
And I would study while in between, when there was nothing going on, I'd be studying for the MCAT. So I go to college, and I did well in college and ended up going to medical school. And then it's kind of weird. I ended up leaving medical school after my first year to go play professional rugby down in New Zealand. Did that for several years, went into the military. My day job was launching nuclear weapons, and that while I was playing rugby for the Armed Forces team. I did that till I was about 30 years of age, and then I got tired of playing rugby. I remember I was laying on the ground playing this team from Russia, and somebody was kicking me in the head, and I had blood coming out of my ears. I'm like, I'm too old for this stuff, so I'm going to go back to medical school. And so the military paid for me to go back to medical school. I was sent to Afghanistan, where I did a bunch of crazy, awful war trauma. I went into private practice. Just kind of humming along in private practice. I was kind of in my mid 40s at that time, was really seeing my own health, despite competing as an athlete. And I was a very successful athlete. I started noticing that I was suffering from some of the common things that happen when you get older. And I was not really excited about that. So I started looking more into nutrition. Not that I ever ate a junk food diet, generally ate a relatively healthy diet, but then I started to kind of go down this nutritional rabbit hole. And as I figured out what worked for me, I started applying it to some of my patients. The patients were starting to get remarkably better, to the point in many cases where the surgeries that I had planned for them were no longer necessary, which I thought was really cool. I guess the hospital wasn't particularly thrilled about the fact that we were canceling surgeries because that's how they make the money. And so we ended up going back and forth. And eventually I decided that in the best interest of certainly myself and others, that I start to practice in lifestyle and nutrition. And so that's where I am today. I ended up eventually, again, what's guided me the whole time has been, what gives me the best results, or what I find the best results for other people. And that ultimately ended up with me pursuing a kind of a meat-based diet. And as much as that's controversial and in contrast to some of the mainstream messaging we're getting, that's what ultimately seems to be providing the best results for not only myself, but now literally tens upon tens of thousands of people that have discovered this. And we are, cataloging and documenting all these successes and getting traction, which I think is exciting. I think we need to focus on preventing sick people rather than treating sick people. If we can prevent that,
Right.
we'd be far better off.
Yes. No, I would definitely say that it's gaining traction. I mean, I've been hearing about meat-based diet, carnivore diet, maybe just for a few years now, but it's definitely seeming to grow and grow and grow. And, as everything does, it has this snowball effect, which is awesome. It's really exciting. I want to go back to your time as an orthopedic surgeon, though, and when you made that switch from looking at things from a surgical perspective to starting to implement some lifestyle changes with your patients. Was it just nutrition that you were working with them, or were you also doing exercise-based stuff, or how did that look?
Yeah, I mean, I always was an advocate of exercise. I mean, I'm still to this day, I think exercise is incredibly valuable. I think diet is probably ultimately better for weight loss, but exercise is such an important aspect. I can remember one time I was trying to demonstrate to somebody how to do squats, just body weight squats, and I was squatting down and my pants actually ripped, my dress pants ripped, and I heard this rip right in the middle of my clinic. And I'm like, oh man, I got a big old hole. My underwear is hanging out. I had to go put on scrubs for the rest of the day. But I mean, it was just, but I mean, I was constantly, talking and demonstrating, and, the people that were willing to listen. But, and honestly, in an orthopedic clinic, you've got people who are in there with back pain and knee pain and shoulder pain and elbow pain and wrist pain. Some of them have a hard time exercising because they're in so much pain. And so it's hard to get that message. And what I found, and what I continue to find, is when you fix the diet, and this is a part of the puzzle that I never was taught in my medical education, but when you fix the diet and the pain goes away spontaneously, guess what? It's a lot easier to exercise when you're not hurting. When you tell somebody, hey, hey, fatso, go run a mile or go do some squats, and their knee hurts the whole time, they don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And I had some pretty significant quadriceps tendonitis. Now I gutted it out and it was painful, and I'm just kind of crazy in the head that way, and I would keep doing it, but I didn't enjoy it. Now I don't have those pains, and I'm just happy. I'm excited that I can be in my mid 50s and run around and jump and do those things. I can't remember who said this, but I said exercise, it should not be a punishment, but a celebration of what your body can do. If your body can't do much because you're in pain or you don't have the energy or you're tired or whatever, it's hard. It's a hard thing to do. So I think you have to get all these pieces in place. And I think diet, in my view, is a huge one. Like I said, I will tell everybody I know to exercise, but I say we got to make you able to exercise first in some cases.
Tell us more about how you became such an advocate for the carnivore diet, because from what you've said, and I'm just assuming this and you can confirm or deny, but it seems like you got interested in nutrition and then you were just searching for what was the most streamlined or most effective form to suggest for myself and my patients. How did you come across the carnivore diet? Were you looking for the carnivore diet, or did you feel like you started more broad and then you kind of narrowed it down to where you are today?
Absolutely. I didn't go into this thinking I'm going to start some new diet and I'm expecting this to be the case. If you had asked me 10 years ago if I was going to be one of the world's leading advocates for a meat-based diet, I thought you're totally crazy. No intention, this has never been my intention. When I realized at age 42 that, hey, my health is going south and I need to do something other than exercise, because I was maxing out exercise, believe me. I mean, there were very few people that train or worked as hard as I do. I went down this path, and the initial one I went was I followed the standard advice, cut calories, eat more fiber, eat more vegetables, eat less fat. And, to be honest, it worked for me. I clearly lost weight. I went from, I remember it was 285 pounds at the time. I got down to like 230. So, and that was about 3 months, and I was exercising a lot and I was hungry all the time, but I was disciplined and I was tough, and I did that, and I got really lean, and I was completely miserable. I mean, I was unhappy. I was grouchy. The nurses said, we really much prefer the fat Dr. Baker better than you because you're kind of an ass, right? So, I mean, I realized it wasn't sustainable. And so I said, I can't do this diet for a long period of time. So I started looking, and I discovered things like a Paleolithic diet, and then I got into low carb diets and a ketogenic diet. And this evolved over about a half a decade. And as I, just everyone seemed to be a slightly incremental improvement, I just kept looking because I was looking at, can I improve my health? And I was already sort of fascinated by nutrition. This was kind of this other part of the puzzle that I'd never been exposed to before. So I was devouring, textbooks and articles, scientific papers, and, books on nutrition and diet. And I stumbled across a group of people that were just eating just meat. And I thought, well, this sounds pretty crazy interesting. I kind of voyeuristically was looking in on this. My mind had been open enough to realize that a lot of what we talk about in nutrition is based on really shaky, poor evidence and science. So I wasn't going to outright dismiss it as nutty. I thought it was a little interesting and probably a little crazy when I first was exposed to it. But as I, watched them and sort of looked at it for 6 months, started to make sense to me enough to where I was willing to try it. And like I said, I did a day. I did like, I'm gonna do one day of eating just steak and eggs, and nothing bad. I didn't die. I mean, I felt pretty good. I didn't really miss. I didn't never really like vegetables to start with. I mean, I remember on the days when I was doing these ketogenic and paleo diets, Mark Sisson was saying, eat this salad the size of your head, and I was doing that, eating through mounds of spinach. And I never really liked the spinach, but I was putting bacon and olive oil and eggs in there and some fruit, and that was tolerable, but I never really liked the spinach part of it. So I didn't miss vegetables or salads or leafy greens or any of those things. As I continued on to this, I did one day, and then I did 3 days, and then I did 5 days, and then all of a sudden I did, a week, and then 2 weeks. And then the end of 2016, I did it for a whole month. And at that time I was on social media, and I had reasonable following, several thousand people. And we all joked, and we said, you're going to die. Surely, you do a month of only eating meat. Surely you're going to get scurvy. Surely your heart's going to seize up from cholesterol, and you're going to have a heart attack, or your colon's going to fall out because of no fiber. And I did this, I put a poll up there. What am I going to die of? And everybody laughed, and I did it. And then 30 days went by, and literally none of those things happened, of course. And I literally felt great. But I went back to my regular diet, which was kind of a ketogenic, omnivorous diet with, fruits and vegetables and, that low sugar fruits. And I literally did not feel as good. I immediately saw that, some of the aches and pains came back, some of the digestive issues that I thought were normal, which weren't, because on a carnivore, they went away, came back. And I was like, I just want to feel better. I prefer to feel better. So the next day, within 24 hours, I'm going back on the carnivore diet. So then it became 2 months, and then 6 months. And then I guess I roped in 100 people to try it for 90 days, and we actually collected data, and we did we called it N equals many, because everybody's saying, well, it's just an N equals one anecdote. And I said, well, let's do N equals many. So we got 100 people to do it. We collected their data. The outcome was very good for everybody. People lost about 30 pounds on average. Their waist size went down. Their resting heart rate went down. We asked them to record bowel movements. They had 1.2 bowel movements a day. It was just, this was the things we did. And then it went from there. And then, of course, I guess Joe Rogan found out about it, and he had me on his show, and then it just kind of went from there. And then, of course, at that point, then I got put on the radar by the vegan sort of folks, and the vegans think I'm the Antichrist or some evil guy that's trying to, just my goal is to kill as many cows as possible, or whatever. I mean, it's just a nuttiness that nutrition has devolved into politics, and these tribes, and people hate you for what you eat, which I think is just bizarre. But anyway,
for sure. So tell our listeners, what exactly is a carnivore diet? Just strictly meat? Is it no carbs? Like what does that look like to you?
Well, the way I describe it, again, I try not to be ideological, because I think ultimately none of us know for sure, what's the ideal optimal path. I usually describe it like this. I say the focus is on animal-based nutrition. Generally, that means meat. It doesn't matter, what the animal. Most people tend to gravitate towards red meat for various reasons. And then, in addition to just focusing on animal-based nutrition, you might have to eliminate or significantly limit plant foods as necessary for the outcome of optimal health. Eliminate the plant foods as necessary. For many people, it means just get rid of all plant foods. It is what they have to do. And then the outcome is measured by health. That's the goal. My definition of health may be different from your definition of health. Doctor's definition of health, and I'm not talking about myself, but another doctor might describe health based on X, Y, and Z lab markers, whereas you might define health as I'm happy, I wake up with a smile every day, my knees don't hurt, my back doesn't hurt, and I look good. We have these different metrics for what we believe is healthy. And I think those are all valid for that individual person. It's not reverse veganism. We're not out here to save the eggplants or save the tomatoes. I mean, we're here just to do what it takes to get you feeling as good as you can and functioning as well as you can. The other thing I won't ever claim is it's going to make anyone live longer or shorter, because there's no data on really any diet that can show you that. There's no long-term randomized control trial on the Mediterranean diet or the vegan diet or the DASH diet that has ever been done that can conclusively prove it's going to make you live longer, not get cancer, not get heart disease. So anybody that demands that data there's none in any diet on the world. So I think what I would say is, if you are healthy today, and let's say you're not, let's say you're diabetic and overweight and you have a bad back and you're depressed, that is going to be where you are from a health standpoint. If you can move over to where you don't have any of those things and you feel good, your diabetes gone, your weight stabilized, you're nice body weight, your back doesn't hurt, and you're happy, that is good. And if you can continue that tomorrow's likely to be good. The best predictor for back pain tomorrow is back pain today. So again, we're not going to say you're going to live longer, but we're going to say your quality of life is going to improve. And I think that's really what we should be focusing on as physicians, not some mythical, reading the tea leaves or looking at the astrology about, oh, you're going to die early of heart disease because of this and that. I would say, let's focus on getting people healthy today, because that's all we can really, truly assess, and then go from there. And I think this whole obsession about what's your LDL cholesterol I think it's been unfortunately overemphasized to the detriment of talking about metabolic health and, patient happiness and other outcomes, to the point where it's actually been a net detriment for many people. Not all. I mean, for some people, cholesterol is an important thing. And I would say the average person in the United States that is obese and, hyperinsulinemic and, inflamed and, has high blood pressure, then cholesterol is relevant for those people. For those people that aren't suffering from that, there's decent evidence to show it's not as relevant. So I think we have to temper the message to, the particular audience.
Dr. Baker, you live this diet, you see people using this diet all the time, and you have a medical background. So I was curious if we're using this diet to become healthier. And healthy, as you said, can be defined in so many different ways. But what are some super common quality of life and quantitative measures of health that you often see change when someone changes their diet from, let's just say, any standard American variation of diet to the carnivore diet?
Yeah, well, I mean, the most sustainable diet is a standard American diet, because so many people are on it. It's cheap, it tastes good, it's widely available, it's everywhere, So, I mean, standard American diet's the easiest one to follow, right? Unfortunately, it's probably the worst diet for us. So really any diet that departs from that is going to see some benefit. What do I see commonly? Well, the top 4 things that we see are improvements in obesity, improvements in diabetes, improvements in digestive health, improvement in musculoskeletal health, and then I'd say mental health. Those are the top 5, I'd say, that we see. Diabetes is, I would say diabetes is not in the top 5, but because it's like 7% of the population, or 8%, maybe it's 9% of the population now in the U.S. is diabetic. But the average person, somebody's overweight, they have joint pain, their digestion doesn't work, and their mood is low. Those are all very common and very common things we see in society. So those things get better, and they get better not only subjectively, hey, I feel better, and objectively, I lost weight. I mean, weight loss is pretty objective. You can look in the mirror and say, I just dropped 20 pounds. That's not a placebo effect. It actually happened. But equally, we see people that are coming off antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds. We see people that are coming off blood pressure medication because their blood pressure is normalizing. We see pretty routinely people with things like digestive issues like IBS, or some of the inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. That's getting better. A lot of autoimmune things, which are quite interesting, where we see things like psoriasis or rheumatoid arthritis, eczema, even asthma, which is an autoimmune disease. All those things get better pretty commonly with people doing this. And as far as some of the other objective measures, I see people that have had Crohn's disease where they're coming back with normal colonoscopies, or they've had blood pressure normalizes. We see lab data. We typically see diabetes, people with diabetes that are on insulin. They come off their insulin, their hemoglobin A1C drops quite a bit. Inflammatory markers, C-reactive protein being one of them. We see that over a period of a few months often tends to drop down to very low levels. We see that things like triglycerides get very low. We see HDL often rise. We see LDL and HDL sometimes go up. Depends on the person. Now, that's a debate about, is that healthy in that context? We've seen people that have seen improvements in some aspects of cardiovascular function, ejection fraction, how much the heart squeezes out. These people that have heart failure, their heart can't squeeze as much, so they don't get as much fluid out. We see that improve. We've seen people with plaque in their neck vessels. That gets better in many cases. So we've got a lot of this stuff, and this is stuff that I've seen, anecdotally, we've collected, we've been pretty reasonably diligent about getting people to contribute that stuff. Some of it's just, my story, that's powerful. Some of it's been objective lab data. Harvard University has done a study on this carnivore diet, which I helped to, recruit people for. It's got about 2,000 people in that study. That study's going to come out later this year. The data from that Harvard study will show very similar to what I'm talking about. We've seen the same thing, so that'll be published in the literature. A study out of Sweden just came out looking at something called SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which is a condition where you get too much bacteria growing in the small intestine where it's not supposed to be, and it causes all kinds of symptoms. They published a case series. Everybody got better, 100% recovery on that. We've got another Cleo Pritajo from UC Merced published a study on people doing the carnivore diet, and it was more of a psychological aspect study. But again, all those people noted incredible improvements in health. And this is starting to pop up into the literature. We're trying to make some of that happen. Obviously, I'm fundraising for a study to do a large intervention trial. So yeah, we've got objective results. We've got plenty of people telling their story, and I think that's at the very least hypothesis generating. I
Yeah.
mean, look at an epidemiologic study and say eggs are bad this week, and maybe they're not bad the next week, and the data from that is not much stronger, or arguably not as strong as what we're doing with thousands and thousands of people saying, "Hey, look, I went on a carnivore diet and I got off my medication," which I think is a pretty powerful indicator. I've got survey data on 12,000 people doing this. We saw something like 70% of the people were either able to completely eliminate medications or significantly, dramatically drop that, and that started anywhere from 1 month forward. So probably those people that if we, by the time we got to 6 months, even higher percentage of people were able to get off medication. So that's pretty exciting.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Now, like we touched on earlier, the carnivore diet is growing in popularity, but at the same time, there's also the plant-based world that is really growing as well, if not, firing on all cylinders. That being said, I think a number of people listening right now might think, okay, those changes in health are cool, but like it still can't be good for your health to eat meat. There has to be negative repercussions. So I guess what I want to ask you is, I want you to talk to us about the proposed evolution of humans and eating meat and, hunter-gatherer societies and everything like that. And what archaeological and biological evidence is there to support the idea that, one, humans have eaten meat for a really long time, and two, actually our bodies are very well designed to eat meat?
Well, first of all, I mean, the easiest answer is eat a steak and see if you can digest it. And I mean, the answer is yes, you clearly can. So we know we can, right? We know we can. We also know that humans have eaten meat ever since humans have been around. And you can argue how far back humans go. I fall in line with the evolutionary model where humanity began somewhere around 3 million years ago, between this transition between Australopithecus and, say, Homo habilis. There is ample evidence in science outside of nutrition science, which has a lot of, fortunately, conflict of interest in it, but there's ample evidence within the anthropologic and the archaeologic literature that we can go to the work of Michael Richards out of Max Planck University looking at isotope data. And so what they do is they'll look at stable isotopes, carbon and nitrogen in particular, and they'll show that early humans throughout Europe, whether they are Neanderthal. Remember, humans are more than Homo sapiens. It's Neanderthal, it's Homo erectus, it's Homo heidelbergensis, and so on and so forth, Florensis, and whatever, the Hobbit man. And so we've got a lot of humans. We are the last human species that is still with us. Looking at the isotopic data, including Homo sapiens, it shows that what we ate and what the other animals ate around us. And it was clear we ate as much or more meat than other top-level carnivores like wolves and other animals that clearly are carnivorous. So those humans clearly were eating lots and lots and lots of meat. For those that say that, we were plant-based and, we just only ate meat because we were forced to and we had to, I would say that, first of all, there are some, again, if we're going to use an evolutionary model, there's people that will say that there was a common primate ancestor between the hominid line and the chimpanzee, monkey, gorilla line. And chimpanzees and monkeys and gorillas, as far back as you go, they've been living in trees, they've been eating fruits, they've been eating leaves, and they've been eating a little bit of bugs. And chimpanzees will do a little bit of hunting, but they've been eating that diet for 25 plus million years. Their brain is still 300 cc's. It hasn't gotten any bigger, despite all that food. And humans, the only way we were able to develop that, and it was partially by climate requirement. The world went through a dramatic change around 5 million to 3 million years ago, where we saw dramatic climate cooling. And when that happened, a lot of these forests, remember, much of the world was blanketed in forest, and that dramatically reduced as the world got colder and drier, and it became savannas. And there's not a lot of fruits in the savannas, but what there is are large grazing animals. Things like Paranthropus robustus and Paranthropus boisei, which were attempts to deal with this new climate change. They grew these big, strong, powerful jaws so they could chew through these woody stem plants that were growing in the savanna, and they could chew through nuts. They all went extinct because they couldn't keep up with environmental changes. Whereas Homo erectus figured out how to hunt, probably scavenged first. They scavenged these animals that the lions and the other big predator cats would leave behind. A lion in Africa will leave behind something like 25 kilos of meat on a zebra. That's quite a bit of meat. So scavenger animals got in there. We were able to access some marrow cavities, the brain, by using tools. Chimpanzees use tools. We know that Australopithecines use tools. Homo habilis made tools So but not only use rocks as tools, but we actually made them. So we were able to quickly figure out how to access those marrow cavities and those skulls. And that opened up the door towards incredibly dense amounts of calories in the form of animal fat. So once we had that animal fat and we had it on a regular basis, in the work of guys like Mickey Mendora and others, looking at the hunting prehistoric areas in the Paleolithic, show that we were very good hunters. We could take down these giant beasts, these mastodons, these mammoths, these giant, woolly rhinoceros very easily with just spear technology. So we had unlimited access to high energy dense, calorically dense food. That's what allowed for us to have this huge brain growth. And as we did that, we saw that our guts began to shrink because we didn't need to process all the fiber to obtain the short chain fatty acids. This is what a gorilla does. A gorilla who, average male gorilla is 250, 200, 300 pounds, about my size. I mean, I'm a 250-pound man. I eat about 4 pounds of food a day. A gorilla eats 40 to 60 pounds of food a day. They literally spend 80% of their waking hours eating and chewing. That's all they do all day long. And they have this huge, giant hindgut, which ferments all that fiber and turns it into fat. They're eating a high fiber diet, but they're ingesting a high fat diet. We sort of just cut out the middleman and just ate fat directly. And that allowed us to shrink our gut. So we don't have these big giant guts like chimpanzees and gorillas do. We have a kind of a streamlined, narrow gut. That was some of the evolutionary things. Now we have a incredibly acidic environment in our stomach. Gastric acid in our stomach is about 1 to 1.5. This is among the most extreme acidic environments in all the animal kingdom. The only other animals that approach that or similar are scavenging animals like hyenas and vultures. And the reason it's there is because they were exposed to a lot of contaminated meat, which had a lot heavily bacterially contaminated, which is consistent with scavenging. So you need that to be able to kill those parasites or those microorganisms so that you can survive. And then those pre-early humans that developed the more acid, natural selection works is the animal has the pH of 3 is not going to live as well as one that has 2.5, and then it's 2, and then it's 2, 1.5, and then 1. And so that's how we developed. And it's very energy intensive to develop gastric acid of 1.5 or 1.0. It requires an extreme amount of energy. So it's not an accident. There was a reason for that. And the reason for that was our diet. And our diet was a diet of meat. A diet that, sometimes was contaminated meat. And so I think that's what was driving our human evolution. We are clearly, meat eaters. If we look at mammalian weaning times, if we look at looking at other mammals and how long they breastfeed, and then what is their brain growth, and we look at humans have a very short breastfeeding time, particularly compared to other primates. Or an orangutan, for instance, usually breastfeeds till about 8 years of age, whereas an average human in a wild, like a wild human, is about 2 years, 2.5 years. And we have a much bigger brain than an orangutan. And the only reason you can go from breastfeeding to big brain from a small child is by having an energy-rich, nutrient-dense diet. In the wild, you have to get that from meat and animal fat. Now, in modern times, we've circumvented that because we now are able to refine energy. We were able to put sugar. We were able to put refined grains. We were able to put high fructose corn syrup. We can feed them that, and that allows you enough energy. But to try to get that energy naturally without modern processing is very challenging. So you have to have animal-based nutrition to be able to grow the big brain as a human. And so that's what we've done differently these days.
Wow, that's fascinating.
I have a question just because you left off on that. We have a toddler, and I'm curious, is there an age range that this kind of diet is appropriate for? Because I had thought about that too when we started introducing food. What's normal is, give your kid this rice cereal. And I thought, what is this coming from? A factory? Like, this does not seem like normal food. So anyways, when is it appropriate to potentially start this type of diet?
One of the reasons people do this diet is to deal with, illness. And I don't know that everybody needs to do that, quite honestly. I think there's plenty of people that get healthy on a diet of some. I think animal nutrition is crucial and incredibly important to human nutrition, particularly developing children. And I think the reason for that is they're in an incredibly accelerated period of time where brain growth, central nervous system growth is particularly important for particularly the first 2 years. And then for the first 6 years, most of the brain growth happens within the first 6 years. It still continues to mature and grow up till you're about age 25 is when our brain finishes growing, so to speak. But most of that is happening, in these early infancy, toddler through about kindergarten. That is an incredibly important time to maximize the nutritional density. So I think animal foods, animal fats, things like eggs, some people would include organ meats in there. That's important to get a lot of that in. Now, does it have to be exclusive and the only thing they eat? I don't think that's the case. I mean, I think they need energy. Kids the growing brain requires a tremendous amount of energy. That's one of the reasons why human babies are fat. If we look at a human baby versus another primate baby, humans have a lot more fat tissue. And the reason for that is because that brain is requiring so much energy. And if it can't get it from the diet, it'll take it from body fat. So we've got to have that reserve. That's why babies have those little chubby folds and they look cute. And, but they're using that to feed their brain. And if we're not supplying adequate amounts of calories through the mouth, we're storing it, in the body fat so we can utilize it. It's one of the reasons why it's always been traditionally thought that babies being fat was a good thing. And some people have taken that to extreme where they have these diabetic babies, which is not quite where you want to go. But as far as when you can start feeding them animal food, as soon as you start feeding them, as long as it's, pureed to a point where they can swallow it, or you're making sure they're not choking and things like that. So, 4 or 6 months, whenever people start introducing solid food. Some people talk about the first food being rice cereal. Rice it doesn't have any animal fats for sure. And we know the human brain does well on animal fats, particularly when it comes to development. So I think, from an early age, that should be part of the diet. Can you include other things in there? Sure, I'd say so. Obviously, if we just listen to shop in the store, if we go look at the formula, and I'm not saying, some people have to do formula, but formula, many of it's very poorly developed. It's soybean oil and corn syrup, or corn starch or something. I don't know. It's corn oil, or, it's just not particularly good stuff. You can make your own if you had to. There's some places that'll talk about maybe more healthy options for that. Obviously, breast milk, in my view, is ideal and optimal. I think that's human evolution kind of dictated that, it's what we're supposed to feed our offspring, as with every other mammal. That's why we are mammals, it's, pretty clear with that. But like I said, if you start out on corn syrup and soybean oil, and then you go from there to rice cereal, and then you go there to fruit chews, and then, little puff things, and then you go to breakfast cereal. You're setting these kids up for a lifetime of metabolic syndrome. It's not a good place to be. But I was raised that way. I survived it, but I probably would have been much better off and probably would have had more brain cells.
Sure. So Dr. Baker, what do you say to people who bring up the concern of like, okay, well, you mentioned, I didn't get scurvy, but like, okay, well, we need vitamin C, don't we? Like, we need these phytonutrients from the plants. Where do we get our vitamins and minerals from? What do you say to that kind of argument in terms of the carnivore diet?
Yeah, again, so I would say, again, the obvious, like I had to, eat a steak, see if humans can digest steak, so if that statement was true, then people like me and the thousands of others and people who have been doing it for 5-10 years should all be either sick or dying or dead. And that's not occurring. We've known, scientifically 150 years ago that scurvy was something that could be reversed by having meat in the diet, particularly meat that's not been dried. So one of the reasons these sailors, these quote unquote British limeys, got scurvy is because they didn't have access to fresh meat. And I don't mean right off the animal, but what they were eating was dried, basically like beef jerky. So if you're going to go on an all beef jerky diet, yeah, you're going to have a problem with scurvy. But if you have access to fresh food in general, whether it's fruits or vegetables or meat, scurvy tends not to be an issue. Now, some people would argue that, well, you're not going to get scurvy, but you're going to have some subclinical deficiency. And that's, kind of like religion words, it's kind of like, yeah, show, prove it to me. Well, you're going to get something in 20 years. Well, I don't really give that much credence because I don't think you can prove it. I think that you are right. You do need vitamin C in the human. We don't make any. We do know that there are compensatory mechanisms for lower vitamin C intake depending on the situation. And so, for instance, we know that vitamin C and glucose compete for many of the transporters across cell membranes, the mitochondria, the intestinal cell membranes. So if you got a lot of glucose, not as much vitamin C gets through potentially. We know that vitamin C participates in the function of something called carnitine. Carnitine is essential for fat metabolism. If you don't have a lot of vitamin C, but you're ingesting carnitine, you're kind of circumventing that requirement as well. And meat has a lot of carnitine in it. And we know we have transporters that will take that up directly. We know that vitamin C has a role as an antioxidant. However, if we go on a low carbohydrate diet, our antioxidant system is elevated. We see things like glutathione. We see even uric acid, which many people are associated with gout. But uric acid is actually an antioxidant. And so you might see an elevation in uric acid without gout. And so there's reasons that we might see less requirements for vitamin C. Vitamin C is also recycled by the red blood cell. We do have a mechanism by which we can recycle vitamin C on the red cell. I think one of the things is we've got this recommended daily allowance, or RDI, recommended dietary, the I stands for right now, but indices, I think, or something. But those things are based on a standard diet population. The requirements are based on that. It's like, we're going to make the assumption that everyone's eating 55 to 60% of their calories are coming from carbohydrates, and a certain percentage that's coming from grain. And this is a standard diet population. And this is what the reference ranges are based upon. Well, we know that I use zinc as an example, and even the RDA has recognized this. If you eat phytic acid, and phytic acid is found in things like legumes and beans and grains, to a certain point, say 1,000 milligrams or 1 gram a day, then your zinc requirements are doubled. And if you eat 2,000 milligrams a day, your zinc requirements are tripled. And so I'm not eating any phytic acid. So therefore, my zinc requirements would be less than the average American. And we see that play out through all of these different scenarios. Vitamin D, for instance, we've seen, you go back in the literature to the 1920s and you look at comparisons between different groupings of Inuit in Greenland. They've got one group that was eating their traditional diet of just seafood and mammal food, and they had low vitamin D levels in their serum, but they didn't have any clinical signs of that. They didn't have rickets. They didn't have anything that would indicate vitamin C deficiency based on clinical symptoms. Another group of Inuit at the exact same time had the same level of vitamin D levels, but their diet included flour and sugar and canned goods, and they had the same vitamin D level, but they did get rickets. And so even if the serum levels are the same, the background diet may change the requirements and lead to nutrient deficiency states. We know that with a number of other things. Beriberi, the same thing with thiamine. Animals on a high carb diet get beriberi at a higher level if their thiamine's low, whereas if they're on a low carbohydrate diet, they can have the same level of thiamine and not get beriberi. So these things are clear that different background changes requirements. We know like magnesium is a cofactor for carbohydrate metabolism. If you're not eating carbohydrates, do you need as much magnesium? Maybe not. There's all kinds of, things where we don't really know. But at the end of the day, I'm like, it is what it is. You can have your theory about what I should be deficient in, but if I'm not deficient in it, then your theory's wrong. I hear it all the time. Your homocysteine is going to be elevated. Well, when we check homocysteine levels on these people, it's not elevated. Well, you're going to have low vitamin C levels. Well, we check vitamin C levels on these people and they're not low. So it's kind of one of these things where, hey, maybe you're wrong. Maybe your theory's wrong. We've got data that would contrast it.
It's an interesting thing you brought up, because one thing that we see here in our studio is people with joint issues. And I never once have had anyone say like, I just had my knee scanned because my knee feels great. And so what I'm thinking is like, hey, if you're feeling amazing and feeling healthy and this carnivore diet has made you feel more lively, probably not thinking, I probably have some major deficiencies in all the different categories. So I was just thinking of a rough analogy in my brain of how that translates, only because I had never heard of it translated into the nutritional world. But it totally makes sense because, as you said, all these data points on how much we should be eating of this, that, and the other is all based on really poor studies, and also off of the American diet, which is a terrible diet, as I think we all can agree on. One thing I was thinking about as you continue to talk about this carnivore diet, is there any individuals that this would be a really poor plan for? Or are there individuals that this would be a really great plan for? Are there like specific populations?
Yeah, for the most part, if you're healthy and happy where you are, I don't see a need to change things. I think generally this is something that helps people that are struggling with various issues. We get a lot of the sort of the worst of the worst when it comes to people with problems. We take them in, we kind of take them into our community and we try to fix them up, and generally we're successful with that. I don't think there's any physiologic or human biologic things that would preclude somebody from doing this. I think all of us are adapted to eating meat. I think that's part of human evolution. I think some people have a better capacity to deal with other non-meat foods, whether it's dairy through lactose, persistent lactase enzyme expression, grains, and things that people that grew up in the sort of, and I say grew up, culturally and sort of ancestrally in the Middle East, where the breadbasket of humanity, they may be better able to handle certain grains. Northern Europeans seem to do better with dairy. So those things occur, but I think meat is this basic food that we all share the capacity to do. And so I think, obviously different cultures in different parts of the world, this is more difficult to do. We have, in India, for instance, beef is largely frowned upon and illegal due to, restrictions due to the Hindu religion. But there's still people in India that I have messaging me every day saying, I'm doing the carnivore diet, I'm doing great. I think it works regardless of your ethnicity, your background, your sex, your age. I think we've got people, 97 is the oldest person I'm aware of doing this diet right now. So it doesn't seem to matter. But there are some, social considerations. There's some cost considerations. There are some, do I even need to do it considerations? Because there's some people who say, hey, why don't you just eat a healthy, balanced diet, include meat? I'm totally fine with that if it works for you. And for some people it does, but there's people who it just doesn't work. I'm willing to say any and all foods can be good or great. I won't go that far. I think there's some food that's clearly junk food that we have no business eating, but any food that we can really just kind of, naturally get probably can be beneficial for many people. I think we should just sort of be willing to say that, vegetables are not necessarily have a halo and they can do no wrong when there's people that clearly don't tolerate certain vegetables, if not all vegetables. So I think we need to be willing to say that and not necessarily say it's bad for everyone. And I'm very careful not to say that this is the only way or these foods are poison or this and that, but I'm just saying this is an option. And if other things haven't worked for you or you're just curious about it, give it a shot. And it makes sense to maybe get some advice and, talk to some people that have done it before, because it'll make the transition a heck of a lot easier. That's one of the things we do at MeatRx. We've kind of set this up, kind of onboard people and to get them hopefully support they need, because again, this is controversial, as you guys know, and a lot of people are not supportive. A lot of physicians are not supportive of that, although it is changing. I get physicians messaging me every day saying, hey, I'm totally on board with this. It's changed my life. It's changed my patient's life. I prescribe it for my patients. So, it's just going to be a matter of time, and like I said, I hopefully not everybody has to do this. I still have hope in the world we can find a diet. If we can get rid of the, and you mentioned the sort of the plant-based movement, unfortunately, much of that is being driven by industrial greed and corporate profit. And we're seeing how can we lower the cost of goods sold by making cheap, highly replicatable, scalable products that we can pass off as meat? We can tweak it so it tastes good and looks good and feels good. It's not going to provide the same nutrition, but who cares? The masses are too stupid to figure it out anyway. They're sick anyway, and they're just going to stay sick. So that's a different topic. Sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Well, I can definitely appreciate the fight that you are embarking on. I feel like it is so ingrained within our culture, just the idea of red meat is bad, or red meat causes cancer, or too much protein causes cancer, or red meat causes heart disease, or whatever. I was just, Sunday I was watching a show, and, it was two super masculine characters out to dinner. One guy's eating a steak, and the other guy says, oh, you got to watch that red meat intake. It'll kill you. That's just commonly accepted phrase. Nobody questions it. It's oh yeah, of course I need to watch it. So I can really appreciate you saying, well, actually, maybe that's not true.
Well, I would say it's definitely not true. But again, you are right. There is a messaging, the media. This is a 24-hour a day messaging. We see that our little kids are exposed to that. It's in the school curriculums now. There's some schools that are banning meat outright. The mayor of Lyon, France, just announced that the public schools will not have meat in their cafeterias going forward. The kids are growing up with this. And the sad thing is they're going to probably suffer from health issues, mental health issues, and they won't be able to figure it out. They'll be just, they'll be like, well, it's got to be something here. Let's throw a drug at you or something like that, or it's, this or that. And I think it's clearly nutrition that is a problem.
Sure.
Now, Dr. Baker, in your intro, Charlie read that you are the CEO of MeatRx. What is MeatRx? Tell our listeners.
Yeah, I've alluded to it a little bit earlier in this thing. So MeatRx is I guess it's a community that we started, myself and my co-founder, who is, she's technical. I'm not a computer technical person. She's an AI and data scientist, AI engineer, machine learning specialist that was positively impacted by the Carnivore Diet. It's herself. And she contacted me about, hey, I'd like to collaborate with you on forming something. We kind of formulated a plan and an idea. And so what it is right now is it's really the largest resource in the world for people trying to implement the Carnivore Diet or seeking out resources. And so we have, first of all, this large, giant community. I'm there literally every day, 7 days a week, doing an hour meeting with the members. Anybody can ask me anything. We sometimes turn that into a podcast where we have guests on there. We have meetings throughout the day for people that have special sort of needs, whether it's a women's group or a men's group or a runner's group or a pregnant women's group or a diabetes group or an autoimmune group or a gut issue group. We got them all throughout the day, people from different parts of the world. We've got a UK group, a Spanish language speaking group. We've got we continue to compile research. We've got the largest research section in the world supporting meat or meat-based diets. We've got something like 8,000 research articles. We've got all kinds of resources. We've got recipes. We have coaching where we have really inexpensive coaching. We literally, it's like $18 for a 30-minute coaching session. It's like ridiculously economic. We want to make it affordable to as many people. We have an instant coaching where you can just call somebody up right away, and within 1 minute, you can get a coach on the line. So we're doing those things. To that, we're going to be adding more data-based stuff as we go forward, as we start to figure out how people's needs are different, where maybe males need something different than females. Maybe diabetics need something than non-diabetics. Maybe people of a certain age need something a little different than this, and maybe people with this autoimmune react a little differently. So we're going to try to figure that out as well as we go. We also are providing resources. We try to connect our members to organizations or products that we want to support, like ranchers, direct-to-consumer meats, because I think that is something that we aggressively need to defend and protect, because I think that is going to be under attack due to these big corporations that want to take over and globalize and centralize the food supply to whereas we don't have a choice. And I think that is something that is a real credible threat that we have to be aware of. And so, those are some of the things we're doing. Obviously, we're trying to get research done, funded. So we got a whole bunch of things going on at MeatRx, and it's getting better every year. And the members help make it. We've got this network effect where the members themselves make the community better and bigger and more productive. And so it's just, every week we get more and more people. And I think it's been something I'm very proud of and very excited to be a part of.
That's wonderful. And now, Dr. Baker, where can people find out more about you? Where can they get your book? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, so the book, it's called The Carnivore Diet by Shawn Baker, MD. There's a few other knockoff versions, and there's another guy named like Stephen Baker or something like that who, I think they've got, people try to capitalize on that, but I think it's available, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, a lot of the bookstores have it. I think it's now available in German and Hungarian, and I think some other languages soon to be hopefully translated as well. As far as, like MeatRx is the best place if you just want to actually have a conversation with me. Like we're having here on video. I do that every day, 9:00 in the morning Pacific time, 7 days a week. Social media, I've got a YouTube channel, just Shawn Baker, ShawnBaker, and then I usually put out a video once a day or so, just a little 5-10 minute chat. I have social media. Instagram is Shawn, ShaWN, Baker, Baker 1967. I was shadow banned recently, and so you had to type out the whole thing so they could find me. So, but I think it's restored recently. So I put up a lot of stuff on there. Some people find it interesting and fun. Some people get a little annoyed by it. But anyway, I'm trying to engage, drive engagement so I can get more people to hear the message. Yeah. I'm on Twitter at SBakerMD, and I think those are the major places where I tend to interact.
Right on. Now, Dr. Baker, the question that we like wrapping up with for all of our guests, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, but I want to know your answer now. What is your definition of health?
I find, and it's kind of a little bit convoluted, but if I'm smiling and happy, that's it, really. In a nutshell. I think it's, you can put into that. I don't really worry about what's this number or that number in a lab. I think that, and I know them and I think they're realistic, but if I feel good and enjoying myself and enjoying people around me and, I'm not in pain and things function well, and I'm not limited in what I can do based on anything health-wise or physical, then I think that's health in my view. Like I said, my LDL cholesterol is going to be up or down. It's going to change day to day. It's not how I define my health. And so I think hopefully most of us use something similar, and I think otherwise it becomes too anxiety provoking, tracing these little numbers, which we don't really know the true relevance of what they really are, and they change every day. So I think smiling is probably, maybe the best indicator of anything else.
You bet. Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time and sharing all this interesting information about the carnivore diet.
This is awesome. Yeah, I know our listeners are going to love it. I know we find it fascinating. And like I said, I've been loving your book. So thank you for your work.
Well, it's been my pleasure. And thanks for reading it. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to your audience. And let me know what else I can do to help. Okay.
Again, one last thing. I want to let you in on a secret project that I've been working on for quite some time now. I am planning on releasing a book by the middle of summer 2021. But here's the thing, because I'm self-publishing this book, there's only going to be a limited number of copies available at any given time. So to learn more about this book and to be one of the first to find out when this book actually gets released, what I need you to do is go to exerciseforlifemethod.com. There you'll find out more information as well as some exclusive bonuses that I'm offering just for simply staying in the loop with what's going on with this book. So to learn more and claim your bonuses, go to exerciseforlifemethod.com, enter in your information, and you'll be automatically kept up to date. Learn all about the book and bonuses at exerciseforlifemethod.com. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.